For all those that have been on holiday, welcome back. Great to see us. I'm just giving a minute or two to admit a few more people, and then we'll jump right at it. That's okay? Fabulous. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome back from summer breaks, and good luck to those who might be going off to a summer break, which I've discovered, which are children-free. Good for you. We're here for the presentation. Tessa from the Rivers Trust is here to talk us through the new water policy and the timeline and what to expect, or at least what it means for us. A little housekeeping, of course, is please keep your mute button on. If you wish to ask a question, raise your hand up. All the same, at the end of the presentation, there will be a section there to have a little Q&A, and we'll take it from there. So without further ado, Tessa.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, hi. So I'm Tessa Wardley. I'm Director of Communications and Advocacy at the Rivers Trust. Lots of names here I recognise, so that's good to see, and lots of people I haven't met before, so that's also good to see. So yeah, I'm just going to give a little run through of, we're in a massive time of change, I think, in water policy at the moment. So I was just going to give a little rattle through the things that I'm seeing and what that looks like, how that might impact us, and things that we might be expecting over the next year or so. So what I plan to do is rattle through some of that in sort of high level, and then it'd be great to have any questions and have some chat about what we think that means, and where you think maybe we should be doing more to influence that, if you think there are particular key points that you would like to see us pushing on more, that it doesn't appear that we're working on, and I can, give you more detail about the things that we're doing and the conversations we're having, and where we're kind of trying to really influence things. So I will start off by sharing, hopefully, a couple of slides. Right, so hopefully everyone can see that, and you're just seeing the slides there. So this is, I've focused this slide on just the next few months, because so to the end of 2025, sorry, largely just because there's so much happening at the moment. So I'll just kind of talk through this slide really. Obviously the main really big thing that's been going on recently is the Independent Water Commission, and that, is really transformational, or has potential to be transformational for the way we manage water. So the Independent Water Commission published their final report late in July, which we have responded to. And government is currently working through, they made some immediate responses to that, and they're currently working through all the recommendations, trying to work out what they will do about the recommendations, which ones they'll accept and act on immediately, which ones they'll think about for a bit longer, and they'll be publishing their white paper, which is their government response to that Water Commission. They've said autumn. Someone dropped in a conversation the other day that I think it's on the comms grids for sometime in November. So I think it's likely to be November before we see that. And then the idea is that will lead through into a further water reform bill, probably looking to get that in the King's Speech sometime in 2026. But alongside that, there are all sorts of other things going on as well. Earlier on in the summer, we responded to consultations on flood budget and new rules for how they might be applied, that has potential to have massive impact and drive a lot more money from the flood budgets towards natural flood management. So that's potentially very positive for the work that we do. There was a call for evidence on nature finance and how we build more sort of private finance into nature recovery. That's another one that we have a lot of experience with that at the Rivers Trust. So and across the movement. So places like the sort of work that we've been doing, establishing markets for ecosystem services on the Wyre, in the Wyre catchment, and Glendronachin and the Air Resilience Company and other things, and things like the riverbank, and lots of activity that we've been involved in, kind of really leading the way on that. So we fed quite a lot of information into that call for evidence. So yeah, the other thing that is kind of going on at the moment that doesn't have a directly, is not directly related to water, and can sometimes get overlooked, I think, within our sort of sphere of influence, is the planning reform, the planning and infrastructure bill that's currently going through the Lords. That actually had quite a worrisome start. And looked like it was really looking to actually draw back on quite a lot of the legislation in habitats regs, and move away from the mitigation hierarchy. But following intense period of pressure from a lot of environmental groups, it looks like the new amendments are actually resolving a lot of that. But that's currently passing through the House of Lords. It's just finished committee stage, and yeah, there are sittings throughout September to consider amendments. Once it's gone through its passage through the Lords, it'll go into a period of what they call ping pong, where it bounces back between Lords and Commons. And I think they're looking for royal assent. I mean, there's no real knowing, but I think they're looking for that sort of sometime in October. As part of that planning reform, there have been BNG consultation that we responded to in July. We've been pushing quite hard for an exemption from BNG for projects that are primarily focused on delivering for the environment. So I'm sure a lot of you will have come across challenges, when you've been doing work on sort of river restoration, wetland creation, weir removals, fish paths construction and the like, where you will get caught by the Town and Country Planning Act and have to put in place biodiversity net gain, and that can really slow things down, can be very negative for landowners, can put them off getting involved, and add just extra cost and time delays. So we've been pushing hard and working quite closely with DEFRA on that, and so that has gone through as a suggestion in that consultation. So we responded very positively to that consultation and said, yes, absolutely, we want to see that go through, and hopefully they should be responding to that sometime in autumn, giving the outcome from that consultation. Other big things that are going on, land use framework, there was a big consultation, again, which we responded to. The plan is that they'll be publishing their sort of the outcomes from the consultation, which might be in the form of a green paper, and that will be this autumn as well. The EIP, Environmental Improvement Plan, review was conducted over last winter, and there is a refresh again expected this autumn. That's actually the statutory plan that comes from the Environment Act. So that is the government's statutory plan of what they will do to achieve on improving the environment. And the desire is that should include much more delivery and proper delivery plans within it. So it'll be very interesting to see what comes out of that and how that starts to shape things as well. The other things that are going on, which I think are very significant for us organisationally, are the ELMS update, There's supposed to be a farming roadmap that's gone into a bit of a black hole. I've heard the original plan was that'd be a 25-year roadmap. I heard most recently that looks like it's going to be more like a 5-year roadmap, but actually recent months I've heard very little about that, so I don't know if anyone here has heard anything more. That'd be interesting to know. The bathing water reforms are still kind of rambling on and going through DEFRA processes. Again, I think they were looking at coming up with some conclusions by November in terms of actual regulation changes. But I think some of the things that have come up in the Independent Water Commission recommendations about public health and how that should have greater consideration, that might impact. Certainly, they might look at delivering that through bathing water, whether it needs reforms or not. Yeah, there's sort of conversations going on there, whether that sort of gets picked up through Water Framework Directive or just, boosting bathing water or some other route. And the other thing that DEFRA are very leading on at the moment is an agricultural water quality review. And we have one of our team members, Alex Adam, is sitting in the sort of the advisory co-design group for that. So lots of conversations going on about greater focus on the farming rules for water, slurry rules, and all of those kinds of things to actually achieve Environment Act targets on agricultural water pollution. And then last of all, I just wanted that bottom line there, making space for water. So this is our campaign. This is our we're working in partnership with the Riverscapes Partnership, which is us, National Trust, Woodland Trust, and the Beaver Trust, and that is pushing for a nationwide network of wildlife-rich corridors along all our rivers. And we had a launch earlier on in the year. We currently have a live petition, so if anyone hasn't signed that, it'd be great if you could sign that. So we're looking to get 10,000 signatures because that forces a conversation in Parliament, and we currently have more than 7,000. So that's pretty good. We're just coming up to another period of activity where we'll be going through. We've got a number of events coming up. So Wildlife and Countryside Link are hosting the Wild Summit in Bristol, which is a big sort of national gathering of wildlife related people, and we'll be running an event there. We have an expert panel at the Labour Party conference, which we've got a number of MPs coming along to, and we're hoping to get the Minister Hardy, who is the Minister for Water and Floods. She came along to our launch and was very, very supportive. So we're kind of, we're trying to hold her to that support a bit more. The Prime Minister also sent us a nice letter, email when we kicked off the campaign, indicating his support as well. So we're gathering MP signatures and going to hand in a letter to him in October. And we have an MP sponsor in Lloyd Hatton, who's down in the Pembroke area. Sorry, not Pembroke, Purbeck's area. He's very supportive and he's our sponsor, and he is pushing for a backbench debate in the House of Commons. So yeah, lots of activity going on there. And just to also note that the Wildlife Trusts are kicking off a sort of doing a bit of a briefing and a bit of push for wilder riverbanks that sort of links closely to the Making Space for Water asks as well. So we're hoping to sort of combine those a bit. So that's kind of the sort of overview of all the stuff that's happening in the water policy space and the kinds of things that we and my team are kind of feeding into. If we just have a bit of a look at what's come out of the Water Commission, the Independent Water Commission. So there are a number of recommendations. In fact, there are 88 recommendations, so a huge amount. Yeah, so I mean, these are some of the key recommendations that I think, are probably most impactful for us, or that we're kind of spending most of our time looking at. So regulatory overhaul. So in England, the recommendation is that Ofwat, Drinking Water Inspectorate, parts of the Environment Agency that deal with water regulation, and in fact parts of Natural England, I haven't put that in there, but they should be replaced by a single water regulator. In Wales, the situation is slightly different, so they're just looking at integrating Ofwat into Natural Resources Wales. Then there's sort of big recommendations around how sort of the national, regional, local governance exists. So recommendation that there should be a national strategy set by government, and that recognising that there's a missing middle in the governance. This should be filled with a regional systems planner, which they've called regional water authorities, so eight in England, and they are largely based around hydrological boundaries, so around the river basin that currently exist under Water Framework Directive. They roughly kind of fit together, and that these bodies should take over planning from water companies and regulators, and look at funding. So they would actually have responsibility for directing long-term investment, setting regional objectives, and engaging local stakeholders. And there's also the link from that to local catchment planning, and there's a call for an increased focus on the catchment planning and funding for catchment partnerships, which I think is something that we have been pushing for hard, and so really, really welcome to see that in there. A number of other recommendations, just some that I've picked out here, around consumer protections, and setting up a formal ombudsman from the Consumer Council for Water, a review of legislation, in particular the Water Framework Directive, which has potential to, have quite big impacts. There are a number of points on environmental monitoring, in particular reform of the operator self-monitoring and making data available, and then some stricter rules around monitoring on abstractions, sludge and drinking water standards. As I mentioned before, there was definitely a bit of a pickup on public health focus. Chris Whitty, who you'll probably remember from COVID days, was sitting on the advisory on the commission, and so he has kind of overseen this greater focus on public health, and how that needs to now be properly embedded in legislation, regulation and planning, with public health officials represented on those new regional planning authorities. There's an interesting conversation, I think, going on in DEFRA at the moment as to who actually owns that particular recommendation, whether it will be Department for Health and Social Care, or whether it will be DEFRA that owns that. But wherever it sits, it will link in with legislation changes, I think. And then just on the water company ownership, this is obviously a high level of interest publicly. It wasn't something that we organisationally fed into, particularly River Action and Surfers Against Sewage did a lot of work in this area, and we work alongside them as part of Blueprint for Water. So we largely left them to take this this sort of side of things, but nationalisation was out of scope for the Commission, and so the report focused on sort of aligning the interests of private water companies with that sort of wider public interest. Their conclusion also found that the ownership model itself was not the most important driver of outcomes and success, and that the strong evidence-based regulation has actually been where failings have occurred, and that by resolving that is the more important task, essentially, and that would be critical in protecting customers. So this report, the Cunliffe Review Independent Water Commission final report was published on the 21st of July. On the same day, government actually, Secretary of State made various speeches, in particular one in Parliament, and he, wrote a letter and did a presentation alongside the publishing of the report. But they've essentially made some sort of strong comments, and I think the big comms kind of piece was abolishing Ofwat and bringing the water functions from the 4 different regulators into a single powerful regulator responsible for the entire water sector. So that kind of has been their big headline. This is what we're going to do. And that seems to have come slightly out of nowhere. Talking to people, I think no one really knew that was coming. Even the day before the report was published, there were people who were sitting on the advisory group of the Commission who that chapter had not been shared with them. So it was quite a surprise to quite a lot of people, or they'd rumoured that this might happen. But I think, I think a number of organisations quite blindsided by that, and I don't think DEFRA have done a huge amount of work on that. So I think that's a massive area. At the moment, everyone's kind of really scrabbling to try and find answers for and how that works and what it looks like. But yeah, so Secretary of State also committed to publish a white paper this autumn, giving the government's full response to the Commission, and to launch consultation on it. So yeah, as I said before, I think we're expecting that around November time, and bringing forward a new water reform bill early during the lifetime of this Parliament. And people who understand more about these things than I do have suggested that that's likely to be, the earliest that will be is the King's Speech next session, so 2026. They've also committed to issue an interim strategic policy statement to Ofwat and give ministerial directions to the Environment Agency, and that is kind of more for the transitional phase to make sure that stuff continues and things continue to happen during the interim. You might have seen that Ofwat have appointed a new, I can't remember what the post was, director or something, of sort of for delivery of the PR 24, so the recent price review and this AMP period, to make sure that all progresses even while the whole transition is going on, so that the water industry investment keeps moving. And yes, they'll publish a transition plan as part of the full government response in autumn. Alongside that, they've agreed or announced that they would immediately take forward certain actions, so certain recommendations. So there was the one about the single regulator, establishing a new statutory water ombudsman, ending self-monitoring and moving to open monitoring, with all data made publicly available online. And they've also committed to including a regional element within the new regulator to ensure greater local involvement in water planning, by moving to a catchment-based model for water system planning. I think, all of these sort of nods towards catchment-based models for water system planning and, regional management, I think all things that we're taking as being really, really positive, and, should strengthen the work that we're doing and the role of catchment partnerships and the like. So, that's a really positive. So we're particularly working, and we've been engaging already with DEFRA, as well as EA and Natural England, on the question of regional governance. They're doing sort of co-design meetings, which we've been working with them on. We're feeding into that. And in fact, I think Mark Lloyd might be in a meeting right now looking at the Future Water Framework. We're also talking to them a lot about monitoring. It's not something that was particularly picked up in the Water Commission work, but DEFRA are looking at quite closely, and the EA, on the future of monitoring, both for water frame, both as part of the review of the water framework, but also just the broader need for monitoring and how that sort of feeds into the regional and local planning. And we've also already started off conversations with DEFRA. I do a lot of work with Blueprint, so that's the coalition of environmental NGOs that are all working on water, and I'm vice chair of Blueprint, so we sort of pull together thoughts across the NGO sector on these kind of things. So we're already having conversations on the Water Framework Directive and where we think that might usefully go, and trying to get them to not scrap it, because we think it's a good bit of legislation that just needs better delivery and implementation, rather than messing around with, spending time on changing any regulations too much. We're also feeding in thoughts on new single water regulator, and just very sort of early thinking on how that might work, what sits within the regulator, what might sit in the systems planners, and how that all interacts. And then the question of constrained discretion, I didn't mention that before, but that was one of the things that came up in the recommendations, was that regulators might be able to apply some constrained discretion as long as they're achieving outcomes. They could potentially demonstrate more flexibility about how you apply things. So I think that was kind of, these, I think I talked about most of these in the overview. In fact, the only thing I think I didn't particularly cover there was the river walks. So river walks were a manifesto commitment by Labour in the election, where they said they would create 9 river walks. The DEFRA team have been working on that, and I think since last April there's been suggestions that they're just about to do it, they're just about to announce. So that seems to be a long time brewing, but it is a manifesto commitment, so I think it will happen at some point, because that tends to focus minds. But who knows when they'll make an announcement on that. So I think that was all I was just going to rattle through. So I'm very happy to have a conversation about any of that, really. Anything anyone wants to raise or ask or add in information wise? Claire.
Well, thank you. I just don't know how you've had time to do all of this. It sounds like it's been insanely busy. I was just wondering if you could expand a bit more on the constrained discretion things. I didn't quite understand that.
So I threw that in rather last minute there, didn't I? So this is a suggestion in the Independent Water Commission report that there may be a way of applying a bit more flexibility in achieving environmental outcomes. And I think DEFRA are really just beginning to look at this and what it actually means. And I think, there are many examples, I think, and we've been providing case studies of where I think that there've been complaints or evidence was submitted, kind of like saying the Environment Agency can be really inflexible. And very kind of, regulations say no, even though there appears to be a much more pragmatic solution. Or, a good example may be the sort of catchment nutrient balancing approach that we believe could actually lead to some really good outcomes, actually, if you look at nutrients across a catchment and don't think too rigidly around 80% from a sewage works and 40% from land. Actually look at it as a catchment and where can you find the best solutions, and actually you can often deliver a lot more if you use catchment solutions. So that would be sort of one example. But I think there is also sort of quite a lot of nervousness that it could be taken too far, and particularly if regulators don't have a strong environmental duty, green duty, environmental duty, or whatever, that decisions could be made for the wrong reasons with the kind of growth agenda around. So I think the suggestion is that it's a kind of framework, but that the sort of principles are that you would still have to really achieve any regulatory outcomes. It wouldn't be a way of reducing any kind of regulatory requirements. And I think one of the things that we're pushing is that, part of the reason I think that the EA maybe have not been good on innovation and sort of applying those kind of things, it's that they don't have political cover. They haven't had that confidence and they're worried about challenge. And so, I think one of the sort of things we're looking at is actually if you've got a framework that government has said, you can work within this framework, you must comply with environmental outcomes and what have you, but you have discretion within that, then that's the kind of approach that you might be able to apply and have a bit more innovation and better outcomes overall.
Oh yeah, okay, thank you.
Rob.
Thanks, Tessa. That was amazing. You got all that in. Incredible. I made a lot of notes, but one thing that we are currently looking at, grappling with, thinking about, let's say I'm in West London on the River Crane, and part of the River Partnerships in London group is the London Surface Water Strategy, which was launched over the summer, but with actually fairly minimal reference to catchment partnerships. And what that is doing, which is a good thing in principle, is saying to lead local flood authorities, you must work on a catchment basis. And they've created catchments that they must work in. And funnily enough, they pretty much overlap perfectly with existing catchment-based approach. But as I say, there hadn't been any reference to the catchment-based approach really in setting these things up. So we're now kind of trying to reverse engineer how that's going to work. How the existing catchment hosts and the existing catchment partnerships might work with an LLFA-based system, which potentially brings in a lot more money and the potential for a lot more nature-based solutions, but also a different type of regulation, I guess, and potentially a lot more political influence. So the reason I'm saying all this is because I think it's interesting. It's an interesting practical demonstration of how to work at a catchment level and how we do that and remain light touch as much as possible. But I'm also curious to know if it's happening anywhere else, and whether there are any other parts of the country where this is being done and what the RT's thoughts are on this.
That's really interesting actually, and probably one of the things I probably omitted and should have said is that flooding was sort of slightly out of the remit for the Water Commission, but there are quite a few references in there saying that one of the things that DEFRA needs to do on looking at these recommendations is think about how flooding ties in and how that applies. So that's it's really interesting to hear how how that is playing out at the moment in London. I'd love to catch up with you some more on that and and hear some more about that, because it's something that we've been kind of in our thinking trying to work out how and where flooding fits. It has to be tied in some way, whether it fully fits inside a new systems planner or whether it's just aligned, or how that plays in. I think we haven't got a clear answer for any of that at the moment, so it'd be really interesting to hear about that. So and just in terms of for other people, just really pleased to see that in the Water Commission that they included sort of quite a lot of detail from your submission, Rob, and that was really good to see that reflecting, and that is has influenced what's coming out in terms of catchment partnerships. I think it's really nice to see when you can see the work that you've done is influencing things. So, I was really pleased to see that got some space in their final report.
So will we. Will Oliver at Thames 21 is taking a lead on how catchment-based approaches are going to integrate with this London surface water strategy, and they've taken a couple of catchments as pilots. I mean, it's kind of fast-tracked that whole thing. I think if it isn't happening elsewhere in the country, I think it'll be a really interesting experiment to see how it works and it, how it sort of shakes down, basically.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, no, I'll definitely catch up with Will on that one, I think. Thank you. Ben.
Hi, thanks for all that. Obviously, lots of governance policy reviews going on at the moment, but I'm very conscious that we're sort of open to some of the well-known tub thumpers that we're not doing enough at the moment, and we're just sort of navel gazing. And in particular, we've got people saying, well, why aren't you doing more? And as a small rivers trust, and maybe for you guys as well, if we haven't got funding, we can't go out and do things. And, some of our supporters are saying you should be doing more on water quality monitoring and so on. But if we haven't got projects to do that and funding to do that, and, we apply for project funding, then stuff isn't going to happen. So, I mean, how does the Rivers Trust movement respond to the challenge that, you're not actually doing enough? Okay, these policy and governance reviews are all very well, but will it change anything? Or is that really down to focusing much more all the time on annual impact reports and, what actually it is the movement has done? So your thoughts on that would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's always more to be done, and there's always more we would like to do, and we always need more money to do that. I think one of the really good things about some of these reviews and consultations and things are that they do come with money attached, or potential money attached, and I think that's sort of one of the really big reasons that we've been pushing on this regional governance for quite a long time, is that that is and one of the sort of big fears is that you end up with the old river liaison panels as they used to be, which turned out to be sort of rather talking shop situations. But I think the big difference this time round is that there is funding. They're looking at those regional water authorities controlling funding. And so that's one of the sort of big debates, is where, and so that would direct funding into the catchments to actually deliver. So there's much more of a focus on how you get to delivery from all of these things, and not just, oh, that's a nice strategy or a nice plan, but actually how does that lead through to action? And so, that sort of, those regional water authorities, systems planners, whatever they end up being called, actually convening that money and having things like the WINEP, having Nature Restoration Fund, Water Restoration Fund, potentially flood budgets, depending on where flooding ends up sitting. There is potential, I think, to actually see, and then, if that all sits in one place, there's potential then to sort of bring in the sort of private financing into that, because there's quite a lot of, we keep being told that there's quite a lot of other funding, private funding, corporate funding available, and investors out there, but that it's currently not sufficiently investable to go into small projects. And so, I think that's sort of part of the exciting bit of what's happening at the moment. And there are, similarly through, a lot, they're not calling it a water restoration fund, but money from fines is now being ring fenced to go into water environment improvements. So that's a big positive. The money from the flood budgets, historically, about 1% of the flood budget has gone towards natural flood management. There is the assumption, or the modelling, of what is coming through the flood budget consultation is that will end up being sort of more like 18% of the flood budgets will be for natural flood management, SUDs, and private flood resilience. So I think there is a lot more potential for funding to actually come through, and then hopefully we can start to do even more.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Lucy.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks so much, Tessa. It was really interesting. Sorry. Thank you very much. Get my mic in the right place. Really interested. You just mentioned about private finance as well. I don't know. Some people on the call today will know I've been quite involved with biodiversity net gain aspects for watercourses, particularly trying to, understand what is actually going on out there from the early days of BNG and the aspirations of it being a great game changer for bringing in some much needed resource through planning and development to it becoming statutory, and now people really thinking, oh gosh, this doesn't seem to be working at all. And even before all the local nature recovery strategies have been published, I know there have been these consultations this year, but do you get a sense that this really is a direction that's going to get support to work, through all of the consultations and everything that's being done? There's been a lot of people, like you were saying, Ben, where are the tub thumpers to say, let's look to what the positives are for what can be a change. The tub thumping seems to be a lot of voices saying this isn't working. And, taking an ultra cautious approach is interesting when you're talking about, being able to have that discretionary, flexible sort of opportunity for the regulators. It sounds like everybody's really, really cautious. Everybody's very concerned, and that things are not really going forward in a way that, Natural England and DEFRA sort of intended it in principle, certainly for BNG. I don't know if you've got thoughts about that, or give us some hope.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting reflections. And, I sort of, I'm not personally involved in delivering BNG schemes, but I talk to quite a lot of people that are. And I think, there's a mixture of views, but the sort of the overriding view that I've sort of picked up, I think, is that, things haven't, things are still developing, things are still shuffling down, and that, is beginning to take shape a bit more and is beginning to work. I mean, I think one of the concerns about that consultation was the talk of reducing or taking, adding exemptions for smaller developments. And, that's a huge number. I mean, so it was slightly fortuitously that there was a massive bit of research had just been done just before that consultation came out that really showed the scale of what was happening in the sort of small and medium development. So I think that sort of gave some really good evidence to feed into there. So that for me is a concern that goes through, those exemptions go through. But I think there is a kind of, I don't know, the sort of mood music that I'm sort of reading is that people still believe in it and believe that it has potential to work, and it is all still shuffling down, and they're looking at improving the way it works, and that it will continue to improve, but there is still that mandate and that desire to make it work.
That's good.
So I hope that's sort of right.
I've heard similar messages coming down from Natural England that BNG is here to stay. It's not going to go away. I've now moved from doing sort of running national training courses to support ecologists who are coming from very much terrestrial habitat background to being able to understand what they need to do for assessing rivers, and also through SAIM, the actual metric calculations for watercourse units themselves. And I'm still doing that, but I've moved into a catchment partnership role in the Colne catchment because I really wanted to understand what was happening on the ground. And really, even just earlier today, the mood music was not sounding very tuneful to me. So I'm very concerned that, actual catchment level experiences are not uniform across the country. I think in some parts of the country it's happening, but I was actually told, oh no, farmers in one part of the catchment are not interested because they don't think there's any demand for BNG units. And I was really surprised to hear that. Never mind watercourse units, like any units. So something for me to take away and find out more about, because I'm really trying to champion thinking about how local nature recovery strategies are going to help us go forward with doing more, you know, certainly for the chalk streams, which are, you know, in the patch, but all watercourses really. Anyway.
Well, yeah, likewise, it would be really interesting to catch up with you on that a bit more. I mean, I was involved in a really interesting conversation with a lot of landowners. So some of the very early adopters, I think Archie Ruggles-Bryce, who is formerly Rivers Trust, I think still a trustee. I think he was actually the first landowner in the country to actually do one on his land. And I was involved and he was talking to a room full of landowners, and it was very interesting, his advice and some of their concerns. And there were definitely some people in some areas who were saying, I mean, his advice for the landowners is don't do it because you think you're going to make money out of it. Do it because it's the right thing for your land. And if you make any money out of it, then that's a bonus kind of type thing.
Good to hear about the elms as well, because as you know, I was a bit shocked. I'm not really up to speed on like the stewardship grants, but they're apparently not happening at the moment, and it's all about the landscape recovery funding, which is hard to access if you don't have a landscape scale proposal. So yeah, it'd be good to see elms coming forward, because that black hole does seem to be concerning farmers. And as you say, there may be a few that are willing to go forward and look at habitat banking and invest in it, but if they can't sell the units, and I don't want to dominate, I know we're short of time, but the last thought was about the NERF opportunity that DEFRA funded. We haven't heard very much about what's come out from that. Are they working on that behind the scenes to show, because that was supposed to be quite experimental, you know, innovative approaches for funding environmental improvement, but you know, what lessons have we got to learn from that? Hopefully not all. It's not working.
No, that's really interesting. I mean, you know, there's a really, really positive feeling around NERF and how successful that was, and you know, it's fairly unique, I think, in terms of funding, you know, and actually has been fantastic in kickstarting, you know, schemes. So yeah, and in terms of where it goes from here, I don't know, but
case studies is urgently needed. When I'm in a training situation, we really want to be able to point to case studies. So yeah, maybe I'll follow up with you separately, and that's something we can talk about, and hopefully it's a watch this space for everybody on good news stories.
I think one of the sort of good news things, both on BNG and NERF actually, is that they are models that are being picked up internationally by other countries. And I think that's quite a positive feedback loop, because it's a good thing to be able to say, you know, to ministers, actually, you know, these are good things that you've done, and other people can see that they're good things, so they're picking them up. So don't back away from it now, because it's working and it's successful, and you know, there's always refinements to be made, but to make things better, but they're sort of steps in the right direction, I think, aren't they?
Yeah, lovely. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Well, it's, you know, it's really good to talk to you and everyone here, and you know, I'm always really pleased to get information coming in on how people are finding, you know, policies affect them once they get onto the ground. And yeah, any information on things that are working and not working is really, really useful for me. I mean, I know we put out calls for information periodically on the Slack channels, and you know, that's really good. But you know, if anyone has any thoughts that they want to feed in, you know, even before we ask, then that's really, really helpful for me.
Really quick last one on that. We're not on the Slack channel, all of us, because we're not all Rivers Trusts, but we are catchment hosts.
Okay.
So I think that's something, Sarah, which Miles and yourself are looking into.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, channel, feedback through the CABA channels as well. Please do.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. We've gone slightly over time. I do understand if everyone needs to rush off because it's their lunch and they probably have other meetings coming through. But if you do have further questions, or maybe you think of something after the meeting, do send it through and we'll make sure it gets through to Tessa and she can give us feedback at a time that's more convenient for her. So thank you. I'm sorry to finish the meeting quite quickly. But Tessa, if you don't mind staying behind for just a minute or two, as soon as the meeting's over, and then we'll just round up. But if there's no further questions, thank you again, everyone. See you soon in the next Lunch and Learn, and take care.
Sorry.
Thank you.